Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Bearhug Club YouTube channel, and we are back with matches you need to see. So, if you've been wondering where the hell it's been on the podcast, this is the reason why. We decided we wanted to sort of, I guess, streamline the pod a bit more, just kind of keep that more focused to like the big topics we kind of discuss on it, and we wanted to kind of move this across to YouTube because this is a series we all really enjoy doing. We think it just lends itself a bit better to that format. So, this is what we're carrying across here. As you can see, I'm joined by Garrett from the show. Say hello, Garrett.
Hello, I'm Garrett from the show.
And we're kicking things off with one of my choices for this brand new edition of it. And we are starting with Trent 7 versus Walter from Progress Super Strong Style 16 2019, which occurred on day 2 and was the main event. This was a unification match for the Progress World title and the Progress Atlas Division title. So before we go into it, Garrett, what did you think of the match overall when you saw it?
When I first saw it, I remember I'd just seen some incredible wrestling already because I watched the entire show all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
And I was almost tired by the end because the thing with the Progress show is that they're still well paced, but there isn't really a bathroom break match often. You know,
Oh, yeah.
there isn't one where you sort of take a break and you go into it like that. So the first time I watched it a long time ago, I thought, yeah, very good, whatever. And I went back and watched it recently when you messaged me, and I mean, Walter or Volta is
Mm-hmm.
one of the best wrestlers in Europe, possibly the best. Uh,
Yep.
he's could very well be in contention for one of the greatest in the world. Um, he's just such a dominant figure and a presence in the ring. And what is amazing about Trent is like he's not even too much smaller than Walter.
Yeah.
In stature size. A lot of things they were talking about is how Trent is one of the bigger guys that he's faced, I guess.
Mhm.
Especially if looking at because at the time he'd faced all the rest of British Strong Style.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Which
but
we'll get through in a second. But yeah, yeah.
even then, together, looking at them side by side, Walter is still just such a presence in the ring. The way he carries himself and his facial expressions, and yeah, it was such a. I mean, David was very tall, but it was a David and Goliath type match. No matter who steps in the ring with Walter.
Yeah, I mean that's the interesting thing about it is because essentially it is a big man match, but there is that David and Goliath story there that's still being told, which is quite interesting about it. It's like the perfect, as we'll kind of get onto, it's kind of like the perfect bookend to the Atlas Division Championship. Because for people who don't know, Progress are very sort of keen on doing really unique and I guess sort of out the box ideas for their titles. Atlas maybe not heavily so much, but this is sort of the opposite of a cruiserweight championship. Whereas with the cruiserweight, you've got to be below 205 pounds. This one, you've got to be above 205 pounds. So this was their way of trying to champion big man wrestling, and they've had quite a lineage with this belt. So the likes of Matt Riddle have held it. Volta himself had already held it before this. Doug Williams had held it, and as we'll get on to, was the last person before Trent to have it. So it's got a strong lineage behind it. Like a lot of the big names that came out of not just the indies, but quite a few like names that have gone on to do WWE and all that kind of stuff. So it's got a terrific following to it. So what I want to do is kind of set the match because one of the reasons I love this match is that it's got such a well built up story going into it. And what I find with indie wrestling is obviously they do their best to try and tell stories, but it's obviously going to be a lot harder for the fact that they don't really have wrestlers under contract. So they've got to kind of risk the chance of booking a long term story and hope that they are still going to be available. Then there's the issue of injuries on top of that. And what's amazing about this is like all the pieces fell into place perfectly and they just told an absolutely wonderful story throughout. So, to give you the sort of backstory to this, so at this point in time, Walter was on a tear as the Progress World Champion. I think he'd held the belt for well over a year at this point. On the equal side of that, Trent was on his wave of dominance as the Atlas Division champion. He won it from Doug Williams in his retirement match at Hello Wembley. So he'd held it so it was May Super Strong Style, and he'd held it since the previous September, so quite a long reign. by this point, Walter had already sort of beaten the other two members of British Strong Style. That they bring it up in commentary. So this match took place not long after when Walter beat Pete Dunne for the NXT UK Championship, and he'd previously beaten Tyler Bate at Hello Wembley at that point, which was again the same show where Trent won the Atlas division. So at this point, it was only kind of really Trent who was the only member of the British Strong Style group who was not only left in Progress because Pete and Tyler permanently moved to NXT UK. He was the only one he hadn't faced. So Trent's goal with this is to now not only dominate Progress on his own, which is why he wants to challenge Walter, but to be the one to try and actually be from his group to beat Walter. What made the story even richer is that Trent spent the build-up discussing the lineage of the Atlas title. So as I mentioned there, it was people like Matt Riddle had held it, Doug Williams. And the thing that sort of irked Trent about this is that Walter had the title but abandoned it sort of as a less title in order to pursue the Progress World title. So obviously he saw that as disrespectful. And in a brilliant, rare in-ring promo segment on Progress, Trent gives this impassioned speech about, he's the one who's like defending lineage of the belt, coming in doing open challenges, because that's something that gets brought up as well with when Walter won the Progress title. It was obviously a natural move, but by this point, Walter's stock was like as high as it had been. Like he was like in demand all across Europe. So whereas he was a defending champion, he was very patchy the shows he would actually show up on. He wasn't at all of them. It was very hit and miss when you might actually see him. Whereas Trent was very much still a regular. He was showing up on shows, doing this open challenge with the belt and having some absolutely brilliant matches. And Trent used that to sort of feed into that story as well. I just think overall there's a lot of elements there, but it was brilliantly set up and kind of woven together.
100%. It's weird seeing Walter as almost a Lesnar type, a show up once every blue moon to defend a title. But yeah, I mean that's just how good Progress as a whole and Trent Seven is at being able to tell that kind of a story, and like it's British Strong Style have been amazing as heels. And obviously anyone who knows Pete Dunne's early stuff in WWE knows that he was an absolute bastard. But every single one of those three can play such amazing baby faces as well.
Absolutely.
Trent, obviously, no exception. You root for the man.
I totally agree. I mean, obviously, if people want to get an example of Pete Dunne as being an absolute bastard, he'll just have to look at his work he's doing currently. But even before then, one of the reasons they just became such a hot stable and hot properties was just because of the work they did in indies as the British Strong Style stable. And what I love about this match, as we'll kind of go through bits of beat by beat about it, I don't think it's actually unfair to say that if you follow British Strong Style, Trent, I wouldn't necessarily say overlooked, but when people often talk about the stable, they often talk about like the work rate and the talent of the likes of Pete Dunne and Tyler Bate. Trent was always like best in the role of being the mouthpiece for the group because he's the one who knows how to cut some brilliant promos, and he was obviously more linked to being a tag team wrestler with his work with both Pete and of course with Tyler as Mustache Mountain. But what I love about this match is that it really kind of shows that Trent is not only a tremendous mouthpiece, but he is also just a tremendous worker in the ring.
Yeah. I mean, one of the big things they kept repeating is that he's this father figure to Tyler and even to Dunne as well, because there's a massive age difference between the lot of them. I've just turned 24. Tyler, younger than me. And how old is Trent now?
I think Trent's like pushing into his late 30s because this is the thing. Like I think people predominantly obviously going to know him from NXT UK and the work he did in the Indies before that. But he's been part of the wrestling scene for a long time. He was part of it when it was still in that lull period where there just wasn't that many promotions and stuff going around, which is why he created his own as well. And they did their own to sort of thing to help boost up the British scene. But yeah, Trent basically is a veteran, which a lot of people seem to sort of miss out on. So going kind of into it then, what I love about it as well is just how red hot the crowd is for this match. So again, I think that you can feed into the fact that this was just so well built, and there is like an even split at the start. But what this match ultimately does as well is this is sort of the match that sort of cement Walter becoming like a full-on heel, and it wasn't just in progress. That carried over in NXT UK as well. So this is sort of where you got to see more of the dastardly side of Walter. So Walter has always been one of those sort of typical things, obviously the mat's sacred and that he's meant to be just a pure wrestler. But as you see for this match, it's not like he's above trying to pull out some heel tactics, as we'll kind of get into later. Um, what I love about this match is it's just not only have you got the story behind it going into it, but they tell a brilliant story in the ring, and it's everything I kind of want out of a good wrestling match. It's got the story there, they tell a story in the ring, but also the wrestling of it. It's purely brilliant. It just starts off with excellent chain wrestling, but it just keeps escalating and escalating to like frenetic pace, and it gets quite scrappy at points as well.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about the Atlas division being sort of the big boy belt,
Mm-hmm.
above 205, and it really is. It at times does seem like two behemoths going at it, but they're not. They don't put on a match that, for example, if you watch a Big Show against a Braun Strowman
Yeah.
match, where it is two people who are, you know, abnormally large men. Um, it's not a match that only those two can put on. You know, Walter can still pull out a pretty goddamn decent like shotgun drop kick.
Yeah.
Um, Trent has these like massive bursts of speed, can pull out like a dragon suplex, like as quick as Kenny can, or as quick as a cruiserweight can. Um, it's like I don't know. It if you are the type that says wrestling isn't if you're a cornet type and you think
Yeah.
that wrestling isn't like this anymore, and yet there are countless matches just like this always going on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you really just never actually have to look far. It feels like you're looking with blinders on. Um, like it's I'm kind of getting. I feel like I'm getting off topic with the cornet thing, but
I think I know where you're coming from. It's a bit like how obviously the time of recording this it's not been long removed since Vince sent the likes of Keith Lee and all of his other big man wrestlers back into developmental just because apparently they weren't uh, basically acting how a big man typically should. So I think this would be the kind of match where Vince would probably be saying the kind of same argument, and that which is like a stupid argument because I mean you're seeing obviously like Waller. Fair enough. His thing is like he can do moves that are very little, but they look devastating. Like obviously he's got one of the best chops going, his boots, but then he can pull off some pretty agile stuff when he wants to, like that shotgun drop kick. And then for Trent, like you say, his thing is he is a big man, but he is pretty like fast and scrappy in the ring, like his chops as well. And the fact he'll pull off like a suicide dive is like a pretty fast and ferocious one on top of that. So it's one of those ones where it's a big man match in it's got those elements there, but they are willing to sort of go a bit outside the box of what typical big man matches would be, if that makes
right.
sense.
It almost redefines what a big man match is. It almost makes you think that naming something a big man match is not
Mm-hmm.
is almost just counterproductive to what wrestling is, because it's not a big man match, it's just a really fucking good match.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter the size of them, each of them could be shorter than me, they could be 5'4", and this would
Mm-hmm.
still be like incredible, just because of the story told, which I'm sure you'll get onto shortly.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, going back to the story, obviously, what's great about this match is that I'd say a good percentage of it is chops, and again, because that just feeds into their style. Walter's known for his chops, but then equally so is Trent. And while early in the matches, they obviously set up the idea that Walters has been massively affected when he goes for a massive chop on Trent outside the ring, but Trent ducks and Walter just connects with the ring post. And I
Mm-hmm.
like how they build into that. That Walter, the commentary try to build into that. Walter's slaps and chops don't appear to be having the same effect because he's clearly injured that hand. I love progress commentary because you won't. Their commentary can go very peculiar, but kind of somewhat. try to bring a bit of logic into it, if that makes sense. So like there's the
Yeah,
whole bit
yeah.
where he's saying like, oh, like the hand's a very complicated part of the body. There's so many little like bones and like ligaments and things just to try and really build that
The
up.
amount of ligaments on that man.
So they try little things like that. Like there's also a really sort of a random but interesting point later where they're both lying down on the mat and they're saying, "Oh, it's like the mat has underfloor heating at the moment because of the way the lights are hitting the ring." You know,
Yeah.
it's a little bit daft, but then you kind of think about it and think, yeah, could make a little bit of
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, it's a very good commentary because it makes you really it really reminds you how tired they are, and how actually brutal this is. And there was a point where they're talking about like how their breathing must be, and it's like trying to drink the air because you're just like the air must become so thick as your lungs just like
Mhm.
heave at it. Um, I feel like a lot of more processed product now.
Yeah,
Obviously, we know what we're talking about there. I think everyone knows what we're talking about. We say a processed wrestling product, but it doesn't have that kind of fluidity um, in its commentary and things it can draw from. Like simply being able to say in that being able to say like yeah, he's just had that match in WWE,
hmm
um, and this thing that happened in this other promotion has affected his hand, and this
yeah,
you know it just helps to build on a story. It's similar in AEW right now where they're talking about Kenta even just being there is
yeah.
like, and they're talking about how he's owed a title shot for the NWJ and JPW US Championship and
hmm
things like that. Yeah, I mean, it's for example, if you went to go and watch a WWE product, they probably wouldn't mention, for example, that everything that Drew McIntyre has won in the Indies.
Yeah,
It's very simply just they barely even mention that he was NXT champion. I don't
yeah.
remember
That's
the last
true.
time they
Yeah,
mentioned that, and it's the same product. They barely even mention that he was Intercontinental champion way back when, because
yeah.
it's I don't know, it's this weird thing where you just don't remember the history of things that happen, and sometimes that's even just somebody hurting their hand last month,
Yeah.
or somebody else hurting their hand last month.
hmm No, no, I think that's a valid point. Especially with that particular wrestling product, they only really want to draw on the history of a superstar if it suits the narrative they're trying to tell. So, in the case of McIntyre, with the build into WrestleMania and even still beyond that, the whole thing was, oh, this is Drew's redemption after being the chosen one when he first had his initial run. Then he had to leave, and then he worked his way back up to the top. That's when they'll try and pull stuff out to suit the narrative. At least with here, they are really staying on point with the narrative they're trying to tell between Walter and Trent. So they bring up the fact that Walter has been disrespectful about the Atlas Division Championship, that Trent feels like he's the one who needs to try and beat Walter to try and bring some lineage back to that belt. They really do a good job on the commentary to kind of keep you up to date of what the story is, of keeping you invested in it, and trying to always constantly remind you about like the work rate they're doing in that ring. Um, well, your question asked was like when you first saw this match, did you ever have a feeling that Trent could have potentially won it going in?
Yeah, definitely. One thing that Trent and British Strong Style and so many of these wrestlers, when they're sort of just let loose, have is that believability. I think
Mm-hmm.
you, especially with a Trent, where you're like, I mean, he'd been champion for a fair while at this point, but
Yeah,
you still think that he could eventually be at the top of the mountain, um, and that was told so well here. There were even points rewatching it where I obviously know the finish, and
yeah,
I was still invested in pinfalls. I was still right behind him when he was on comebacks and things like that. And it's just purely down to his uh, tenacity and way to like bring the crowd on his side and just I don't know. He's got this massive baby face quality about him that is
yeah,
just so. endearing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me personally, when I first watched this, I didn't think going in Trent could have won, and this is mainly just because of my thought process at the time of how his other stablemates often overshadowed his ability, and the fact that if they couldn't put down Walter, I just didn't think he could. And I honestly, going in, I didn't know what the expectation was, despite following the build, because I knew Trent was a good wrestler. But this for me was the match that really cemented the fact of how brilliant he is in the ring. And what I love about this match is that, well, I started off thinking there's no way Trent's going to walk away from this, but then as the match went on, I generally thought it could be his time to win. I changed tide with the match, and like you say, watching it back now, you can. The sign of a good match is that the fact, like, even if you've seen it before, you know the outcome. If you can watch it again and still have that same investment of like thinking this could be where he's going to win, even if you know he doesn't, is the sign quality of a really good match.
Yeah, it's the sign quality of any good media.
Mhm.
When it's like when that thing happens, when that music sting hits, when the let's say Endgame, right?
Yeah.
The point where he picks up the hammer. Spoilers for Avengers Endgame, as if you've watched, as if you haven't, like, as if you've not watched that, but you have watched this.
Yeah.
You know, where he picks up the hammer for the first time, or he says, you know, Avengers assemble and they will charge. If you, I mean, like, you know, obviously some people aren't too into their Marvel films, but if you, when it works, you still get that little bit of like, you know, heart drop moment, or you get those goosebumps at that moment. And a good wrestling match
Mhm.
will give you that time and time again, not just when you first watch it. Punk winning money, Punk winning at Money in the Bank,
Yeah.
right? That gives me that like heart drop moment every time.
It does.
Um,
It really gets you.
like it gives you that,
Um,
that incredible like rush of adrenaline when he wins, and then you get a little bit of a heart drop moment when Vince comes out and or you know sends Del Rio in. Um, it's you know top notch, and this is very much the same. I think anytime you watch this, if you're a fan of wrestling, their you know their storytelling is gonna endear you no matter what.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, this is the thing with why I became such a big fan of Progress is that they have so many different elements to it of why the product's fun. Like, you know, they can have a bit of a laugh with their matches. They can give you a bit of comedy. They try the best to like add in great stories. But at the end of the day, if you want to watch some pure, just amazing wrestling, this is why you should check them out. They basically throw in all different elements, whether it's from WWE, whether it's from New Japan, whether it's just bringing back the style of like the old school British style of wrestling. They just bring so many elements to it. And this match in particular, like it's like how they mentioned with Seven when he goes really into the chops in the corner for like how he's like doing it, like going to to his hero Kenta Kobashi. Like, you know, they kind of do wear their sort of elements and influences on their sleeve with this. And like this is the kind of match I feel like it wouldn't feel out of place in like a sort of a Japanese setting. It just has that kind of very hard hitting, brutal style to it throughout, and it just feeds the story so well of how Walter more or less is dominant throughout, but then Trent gets those moments where he'll, for better like word, hulk up and get in his sort of licks to it. You know what I mean? There's like the bit where they're doing the chop battle. Walter takes him down, but Trent immediately gets back up again and starts throwing his. It's just well paced in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes I believe a match is almost only as good as its setting.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a weird relationship with the audience. It's kind of like comedy,
Yeah.
right? A comedian telling a joke. If you're telling a joke to no one in an empty room, it's completely different to telling a joke in for 1,000 people that have paid to see you in a stadium.
Mm-hmm.
And wrestling can be very similar depending on the crowd you do it in front of. Um, whereas a timeless match such as this really could work anywhere. It could work in the COVID age where um, there is no crowd.
Yeah.
It could work in a Thunderdomeless arena, and you could still engage with it. Um, However, having that crowd is still, you know, such a boon to them.
Yeah.
Um, and it could even work in a like a Japanese you know, it could work in Sumo Hall or Osaka Joe or something, where the audience aren't aren't yelling, Trent Seven, just it would be the occasional, ooh.
Oh.
Or if they really like Trent, you'll just have someone in the background going, Trent, Trent, Trent. I'm setting off the dog when I do that. Hold on, wait. Trent.
No, I absolutely agree. This match could have taken place in any setting, and it would still just be an absolute classic. I think we've hyped them up enough, but then what makes it even more special is you've got those Progress fans who, like we said before, are some of the most unique fan base on the planet when it comes to watching their product with the things that they chant. They are very much similar to like how ECW fans were back when it was the proper ECW. Some of the most hardcore and loyalist fans you'll ever find. Um, I think the one thing that might have dampened it for this is probably because obviously they're doing this in Alexandra Palace, so they're out of the ballroom for this one. It's a much bigger venue, which you and me have seen a Progress show at, so it's quite expansive.
Yeah.
I feel like obviously with that the audio issues they're going to have, so it didn't sound. You couldn't always hear the crowd that well through it. Like I think if it was in the ballroom, you would have had that much louder crowd levels for it. But I think it at least feeds in brilliantly with the sort of conclusion to the match. So, as mentioned throughout the match, you sort of see Walter kind of slip more and more into sort of heel tactics. Like the fact is, like even at the start of the match, with some people trying to wind him up, he's like basically doing like that to the crowd and just trying to really sort of rile them up and show that he doesn't really care what they think. But what leads at the final, so we get one of your sort of standard ref bumps with Trent getting chucked into referee Joel Allen. And then Walter used this move to go out the ring and get both title belts and comes into the ring, and the pair have a tug of war. And it ends with Trent snatching back his Atlas division. Walter's got the world, but Joel's starting to stir at this point. So Walter quickly abandons his belt and immediately tries to grass up Trent. And
Yeah.
I love Trent, obviously, just trying to fight it off. And you think, oh, don't let it end this way. And Walter obviously uses that moment to cinch Trent into the clutch, gets him down on the mat. And it looks like Trent's nearly going to fight back, and he does get his foot on the rope. However, he passes out, and referee Joel Allen doesn't see it, awarding the match to Walter, and Walter, being the now dastardly heel he is, just kicks his foot off the bottom rope.
Yeah, it's absolutely probably one of my favorite finishes of a long while in like cementing a heel and just okay, when you've got a crowd that there's a difference between a good crowd and a hot crowd, right?
Yeah.
If there was a good crowd, Walter could have thrown away his belt, pointed at Trent, and then people would have been like, they would have cheered at that just because it was a very interesting thing to see. They maybe even might have got some Eddie chants going, Eddie Guerrero, like a Viva La Raza type thing. But because this crowd was so hot and so invested, it was booze. It was like panto, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, nah, ref, he's behind you. It wasn't Trent, and people were so invested in that. And much the same where the ref wasn't looking, and behind him, his foot was on the rope the whole time. Well, not the whole time, but towards the end when he had him pass out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, like it's not just the panel, it's the fact when Walter first grabs the belt and you get the Progress crowd chanting the mantra of the company of "Don't be a dick" at him.
Yeah.
So so that kind of, it's not only just about like the support of Trent, it's the fact like there's basically been like, oh, don't be a dick. We just want to see like a good contest here, and he's like obviously coming in to try and pull some heel tactics just to cinch that win overall. So again, it just shows like how great the Progress fan base can be with this kind of thing. Like they really feed, they're really on point with feeding in to the correct chance for a match and the way to kind of help that match along. It's not like you'll see a lot of wrestling shows where the chants can just basically derail a match because they're obviously not chanting the way they should be. With this one, it's like perfect throughout. Like they're chanting at the right points. They're trying to like back up the face and the heel dynamic there. So it's just really well done, and the crowd were on point for it throughout the whole match.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, this is definitely a match that could be in strong contender for one of my top 10 all-time favorites. It's definitely up there for me. The one downside I have to this match is I was really hoping it would lead into some rematch down the line, which just hasn't happened yet for the fact that they're both kind of away from Progress now. But what excites me is the hope that maybe we'll get to see them square off in a big match at NXT UK, because I would just absolutely adore to see these two go at it again on that scale.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pay-per-view level matchup. If that was headlining a pay-per-view, I would probably go back. I haven't been to one since Blackpool, NXT Blackpool, the first one. They've done two now in Blackpool, haven't they?
Yes, two Blackpool shows. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you were at the one where Walter debuted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just missed Triple H coming out because we had to run for a bus. That the finish to that show was a bit rough. Joe Coffey and Dunn had a bit of like miscommunication on the top ropes. It was a bit shaky, but when Walter comes out for the first time, you know, that's another thing as well. Is there's a lot of, I think, because of the diehard nature of a lot of British wrestling fans. You know, if I really paid attention and I looked at the crowd that I was with, I'd probably already seen half of them, if not more, at a Progress show before. You know, there was no talk of it's similar to AJ debuting the Rumble, right?
Yeah.
Where it's already intertextual for everyone there to know who he is. WWE didn't need to do like a sneak in some AJ stuff prior or do like a vignette for him. People knew. And you know, the UK crowd know like who Walter is. And if there is one person who doesn't, you'll know by the time he gives you, sends off his first big boot. You're like, all right, that
was why it was so perfectly done. I think you're right. Like I imagine if they tried to debut him on the main brand NXT or even just the main roster and did it that way, it would have felt probably as a lot flatter. Whereas the fact with NXT UK, you've got that fan base that clearly a big portion of it have come from the British indie scene as well as the wrestlers. So it's already well made there. You don't have to hype anything up. You just have to have them come out. That's going to get a popping of itself. And you're right, to make sure people are aware of how much of a force this guy is. That big boot he delivers to Joe Coffey is just perfect. And then he just stares down, done, leaves, and that's all you need. It was just so brilliantly done.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah.
That is a match you need to see.
Yes.
You need to fucking see it or else. This one, luckily, is part of the Progress and WWE partnership, so you can catch it on the WWE network.
It is. I was so happy this got brought back on into this. So if you want to find it, it's on a compilation they recently released where I think it's just the history. It's the best of the Atlas division or best of the Atlas Championship. I was so happy they added it to that because if you try to find it on the Demand Progress app, it's currently not there because, again, this was part of their last Super Strong Style tournament they were able to do, which the whole thing's been removed, as we discussed on the pod recently, due to the whole thing with speaking out and David Starr. So I was a bit good in that because I do adore this match. So I was so happy to see it on there. So yeah, if you want to check it out, just go to the network. It's all there available for you to see. Any final thoughts before we close it off there?
Consider subscribing.
Yeah, well, I just brought it up there. If you want to find us, you can find us at the Bearhug Club podcast on Facebook and YouTube, Bearhug Club Pod on Instagram, and Bearhug Club on Twitter. Please, for any of them you do, consider sharing, subscribing. All that great stuff helps us out massively. If you just want to actually listen to the full pod episodes we do, we're available on pretty much most platforms. Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on all sorts, so you can find it in most good places. We hope you enjoy this content as well. And if you want to check out some other content we do, we've recently just started our Outside Interference series where we get some of our non-wrestling fan friends, show them some wrestling content, and just get that kind of outside view to it. And I had a lot of tremendous fun doing it with our friends at the Pick and Mix podcast, so please check that one out. Anyway, thanks for checking us out, guys, and we'll see you next time.